Salvete discipuli, hello and welcome to our Latin class for this week. This week we are in stage 9 of our Cambridge Latin course, and we've got some new grammar to learn. So bear with me and we'll get started. Some new noun grammar specifically. So Stage 9 grammar, we're learning about indirect objects and the dative case today. So we've got a new noun case. So let's just quickly kind of do a little bit of English grammar review first. So we have a sentence, the woman gave money to the merchant. Kind of following in line with some of our sentences from this chapter. So in this sentence, which word is the verb? If you said gave, you'd be correct, right? The verb is our action word. So gave is going to be our verb here, and this is a past tense verb. In Latin, it would be in the perfect tense. So which word then would be the subject? If you said woman, you are correct. Our subject is the person or thing that is doing the verb. So in this case, the woman gave. So gave is our verb, the woman is the one giving, right? And then which word is our direct object? If you said money, you would be correct, right? Our direct object is the person or thing that is directly receiving the action of the verb. So the woman gave money. Money is the thing that is being given. And then what is our indirect object? If you said merchant, you'd be correct. The indirect object is indirectly receiving the action of the giving. And we'll talk more specifically about that in just a minute. So hopefully, English-wise, we're somewhat familiar with these terms. Again, we've been talking about subjects and direct objects for a while. Indirect object is kind of the new one for us in Latin class. So, what's happening? All right, there we go. So in our sentence, the woman gave money to the merchant, right? Money is our direct object in the sentence. It's the noun that directly receives the action of the verb. In this case, it's receiving the action of the giving. It's the thing being given. So what was given? Money was given, right? So you can kind of answer the question, what was verbed? So if you're saying the boy hit the baseball, right? Hit is your verb. Baseball is what was hit. Right? The girl sees the dog. What was seen? The dog. So it's what was verbed, right? Or what is verbed. That answer to that question is going to be your direct object. Okay? Now, the woman gave money to the merchant, right? This little kind of phrase here is where we have our indirect object. So the indirect object is the noun referring to a person or thing that is indirectly affected by the verb. So it's not receiving the direct action of the verb, but it is still affected by the action of the verb. So in English, we're going to typically add to or for before a word that is the direct object. So in this case, the woman gave money to the merchant. So money is what she gave. She gave it to whom or what or for whom? The merchant. All right. I'm trying to think. So just verbs of giving will often have an indirect object. Or in this chapter, I think we have the verb to show as well. So the merchant showed togas to Metella, right? So verbs of showing will often have this as well. So it's this noun that is indirectly affected by the verb. And that's what our indirect object. So who did you give money to? Or to whom? I want to give money to whom? To the merchant. All right, so all this being said, that's kind of all English examples. What does this look like in Latin? Now in Latin, this is going to be, this indirect object is going to be taken up by a specific case, the dative case. So to review our cases, right, nominative case is used for the subject. Nominative cases have specific endings. Accusative case in Latin is used for the direct object, the noun that receives the action of the verb directly. And again, that has its own set of endings for nouns. And then dative case is our new one. This is the new sets of endings we're learning today. This is for indirect object. So again, these nouns will have their own sets of endings for the dative case. So what are those endings? So dative case, we have first declension, second declension, and third declension, and the endings vary a bit for each of those, like they have for our other cases. So for the dative case, our new first declension endings are AE in the singular, and plural dative is a long IS. Now, this ending might look a little familiar, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit. So these are, remember, first declension are nouns that end in A. So we still see that kind of A pattern here. This dative plural is one of the few endings in the first declension that does not have an A in it. All right, in second declension nouns, remember these are nouns that end in US, like servus or cookvus. These dative case endings will be a long O and a long IS. So we see the dative plural is the same for first and second declension. So that's kind of nice. And then third declension, our kind of wonky declension that has some weird things happening with it. In the singular, it's a long I, and the plural is ibus. And this long I ending is probably looking a little familiar as well. And again, we're going to talk about that on the next slide. So these are our new dative case endings. So make sure you write these down. Oh, I forgot to say at the beginning of this video, there is a worksheet on Google Classroom that you can print out and kind of fill out the notes as we're going through. So if you haven't done that yet, pause the video, go back, print that out and fill it out. So you have all of these endings kind of written down in one place with some other information that we're going to cover as well. So nota bene, little note. So note this. Maybe you've noticed this. Hopefully you've noticed this. We see some repetition with some of our noun endings, and there can be a few endings that are the same in different cases, in different declensions, and in singular versus plural. So here's kind of some examples. I'm gonna need to move my face out of the way. So here we have some examples of first declension, second declension, and then a couple of third declension nouns with our nominative, dative, and accusative endings. So if we look at our first declension to start, okay, you'll see we have this AE ending in the dative singular and also in the nominative plural. So this ending is the same for dative singular or nominative plural. In second declension, right, we have none of the endings are the same within this declension, but we do see this long IS ending is the same for dative plural for both of these. That's not going to cause too much confusion because it'll have the same function. They're both plurals, so that shouldn't cause too much confusion with those endings. But this long I for the nominative plural in second declension nouns might cause some confusion with third declension, because third declension dative singular is also a long I. So this is where we can see some confusion, especially because it's the same ending, but in different declensions, and one is singular and one is plural. So keep that in mind. This happens. In other cases, there are more repetition with endings. So this is one of those times where knowing the declension of nouns helps. So one of the reasons why I've been having you guys learn noun forms in their dictionary entry, because that second form will tell you what declension a noun is. So if you know what declension a noun belongs to, for these ones, you'll know immediately if it's a dative singular or nominative plural. But if you can't remember what declension a noun belongs to, we've got some other tricks to kind of help you figure out in a sentence what case a noun might be. So that's this next thing. So we've got, how do you know what case a noun is? So these are some golden rules of translation. So these are kind of some steps that for the time being, until you kind of get to a certain level of fluency, these are steps that you want to try and follow as you're translating a sentence that can help you kind of puzzle out what the different nouns are doing in a sentence. So again, on that handout that's on Google Classroom, there's some fill in the blanks for these. So you're going to want to write these down, either fill in the blank on the worksheet, or you can write them down on a separate piece of paper, whatever works best for you, but get these down. All right, first thing you always want to do in a Latin sentence, the most important thing, number one thing, find your verb. Your verb is going to give you a lot of very crucial information for the sentence. So the first thing you should always look for is your verb. So find your verb, because your verb is going to tell you not only what tense the verb is, so you know what tense and things, but the ending of your verb also tells you if it's singular or plural and whether it's a first, second, or third person. So the verb gives you an idea of who your subject is. If it's first or second person, that's easy. It's either I, we, you, or y'all, and you don't necessarily have another noun needing to tell you who the subject is. Now, for third person, those T and NT endings for our verbs, those are the ones where you're going to need to then specify what your he, she, or it, or they is, right? You're going to need to find a noun that specifies who your subject is specifically. But the verb ending will tell you whether it's singular or plural, and so that'll tell you if you need to look for a singular or a plural subject ending. So once you've found your verb and you've gotten all the lovely information that the verb has to give you, your next step is to find your subject. So again, if your verb is first or second person, your subject is already good to go. It's in the verb, right? But if your verb is a third person, you're going to typically have another noun specifying the subject. So subject is often the first word of the sentence, or maybe the second one if it's got an adjective coming before it or another word coming before it. But your subject is typically one of the first words of the sentence. So that's a good place to start, finding your subject. And then again, looking at your subject to make sure it matches your verb. So if your verb is singular, right, you need to make sure that your subject ending is also singular. If you find a word that you think might be the subject, but it's a plural ending and your verb is singular, that can't be your subject. So as I said subject like 5 times in that sentence, but you have to make sure your subject and your verb match in numbers. So if the subject is singular, your verb will be singular, vice versa. And then if it's plural, they both have to be plural. All right. So again, first thing, find the verb. Verb's usually towards the end of the sentence or end of a clause. And then find your subject, usually towards the beginning of the sentence. Okay. Make sure they match. Once you've found your subject and your verb, you can look to see if there's a direct object. So if it's an action verb, if it's a transitive verb, there's typically going to be a direct object. And our direct object endings are some of the most recognizable. Our accusative direct object endings are some easiest to recognize, right? It's either in the singular, going to end in an M, or as, os, ace, right? So these are our plural accusative endings. So know these accusative endings. These are the easiest ones to recognize, and they're not really duplicated. Technically, es can also be a nominative plural for third declensions, but if you already have your subject, then you know this is going to be a direct object. All right. So verb, then find your subject, then see if there is a direct object. Now, not every sentence has a direct object. If there's the verb to be, right, sumes est, sumus estis sunt, or in the imperfect tense, eram, eras, erat, eramus, eratis, erant, then those are just linking verbs, sort of. So that's not going to have a direct object with those verbs, but transitive, right, action verbs will have a direct object. So once you've found out whether or not your sentence has a direct object, and you found it if it does, then translate what you have so far, right? Your subject, your verb, and your direct object, because that's 3 parts, right? Dog sees girl, right? The dog sees the girl. So you've got kind of the basic parts of your sentence, the basic framework. And then you see what else is left in the sentence that adds some more details to it. Are there adjectives modifying the nouns? Are there any prepositional phrases happening? And then our new thing, you can look for indirect objects. Now, with indirect objects, little hint, you're typically going to have indirect objects with verbs of giving or showing or something along those lines. And indirect objects are translated as to or for. So if you see a noun and you're like not sure what it's doing, but the verb is a verb of giving, right? The girl gives a gift. You're often going to have in that sentence an indirect object saying who she's giving the gift to. So you're going to want to find your noun that has a dative case ending, and that's how you kind of know. So in the cases of like our previous thing where there's some endings that are the same across the board, kind of following these steps can help you rule out what case a noun might be. So if you've already figured out, okay, my verb's here, my subject is the beginning of the sentence here, and then you have a noun kind of in the middle of all that that has a potentially subject ending, but we already have our subject, then you know that that's probably going to be a different case ending. So the one that is most often is we have 2 forms where there's a singular dative is the same as our nominative plural. So that AE ending for first declension nouns can either be dative singular or nominative plural. And then that long I ending for third and second declension. In the second declension, it's nominative plural. In third declension, it's dative singular. So again, kind of puzzling out things first. If you've already got your subject, right, and there's no conjunction linking it to another subject, then you can safely assume that that word that's got that ending is probably going to be a dative case indirect object. So it's kind of like process of elimination a little bit. So we've got this kind of formula, and then you kind of puzzle it out. Now, this all sounds very tedious, going through one step, then the next, then the next. But as you read more Latin, you kind of start to do this unconsciously, and you start to get in the habit of verb, subject, other things, and you start to do it more quickly and more naturally, and there's more fluidity to how you are translating a sentence, and you're not having to necessarily think about each step by step by step by step. You just start to kind of do it automatically, like how we read an English sentence, right? So for now, if you're stuck on a sentence, go through these steps. If you're like, wait, what's happening here? I know what these words mean, but what's going on? Find your verb, find your subject. Is there a direct object? Yes, great. What do you have so far? What other words are left? How can we fit them into this puzzle? So for some more complicated sentences, you might need to be going through these steps to kind of puzzle things out. And then eventually it'll start to become more second nature and become easier to do. All right. So that is dative case. We're doing a little bit of practice. So on that worksheet on Google Classroom, I have all of our noun endings now in our noun charts with nominative, dative, and accusative. I do have them in that order for a reason, because that's the order in which they are typically in noun charts. So dative technically comes before accusative in the noun charts. So start practicing your dative case endings. And then on the last page, there's some blank noun charts where I've given you nouns, and I want you to try practicing changing the endings of the nouns to their different cases. So again, pay attention to, is it a first declension noun? Make sure it has all the correct first declension endings for nominative, dative, accusative, and then singular and plural. Same for second and third declension nouns. So do your best with that. Let me know if you have any questions. If you're confused by anything, please let me know. I'm more than happy to schedule a Zoom with any of my remote students who need a little bit of extra support with the new grammar. So just give me an email and we can figure something out. But otherwise, use this information as you work on your translations this week. So these passages are going to have a lot of dative case nouns in them, especially, again, look for those verbs of giving and showing and handing over. Those are a lot of our new verbs in this chapter. So when you see those verbs, that's your clue that there's probably an indirect object in the dative case in that sentence. All right? All right. Best of luck to you all. And again, as always, let me know if you have any questions. Otherwise, I will see you in our next video. Valete discipuli.